One could not possibly take advantage of this territory without having had a horse. There's no doubt that horseback riding had a great impact upon the expansion and occupation of the territory in this region.
But could horseback riding have reached these parts centuries before it was known in China? Victor's friend, archaeologist Lu Ingua, is a leading expert on the ancient nomads. His spectacular finds are revealing the nomads were expert riders as early as 800 BC.
The 4th century BC horse saddle that we found doesn't have any metal or wood on it. It's upholstered, as you can see, white leather. It's as far as we know, it's one of the earliest saddles in the world that's so perfectly preserved. We can see that it's been mended here, patched up. It has beautiful bone fittings on the edges to tie the straps on.
And at the back here.
Yeah. And the bridle and the bit, things like this, we found a lot from those 7th and 6th century Chawahugo burials. Yeah.
The bit at the bottom. I've got the headband up here.
The cheek pieces are wooden sticks. The snaffle bit is made of iron. And we have the leather straps, the bridle.
And this is the rein.
And this rope.
And the rope must be for tethering the animal.
It's just like it's brand new. It's still very flexible. It could take a lot of weight. The introduction of horseback riding to this region meant that the people had vastly increased mobility. That means that they could take advantage of more distant pastures. They could move their yurts, their houses to farther away. That means the pastures that they could utilize were vastly extended.
To survive the bitter winters high up in the mountains, the nomads relied on extremely well-insulated but portable homes called yurts.
This is the flap that covers the door of the yurt, and it's done with felt, and it's quilted to make it much firmer because the felt otherwise, with all of wear and tear, would pull apart. And then it's edged with a nice braided wool edging. And down at the bottom is this nice woven band. It goes around the complete circumference to hold the felt in place. We've seen all of these techniques in the mummies. We've seen the braided bands, we've seen the quilted band, and the felt. All of this was influenced from the nomadic people down to the lowland sedentary people.
The yurt and its occupants' way of life have changed little in 2,000 years.
I'm interested to know what kind of diet they have. What do they have in their normal diet?
Very, almost no vegetables, mostly milk products.
And we see some of them on the table here, don't we? Yeah.
And some meat, a bit of meat.
Does their diet vary?
Charlotte learns that this family of nomads exchanges meat and wool for grain, which they add to their own food products. Without this carbohydrate supplement, they would suffer from crippling malnutrition. If the ancient nomad population was healthy, they too must have traded with outsiders for grain.
They don't have many illnesses. They just flus, colds, that sort of thing. They have 500 sheep and goats, 500 sheep, 100 cattle, and 80 horses.
But exactly who were the nomads? And where did they come from? Archaeologist Lu Ingua suggests they try to locate a mysterious site dating from the time of the ancient nomads. Perhaps it will yield some clues.
Oh, God, amazing. Look at that.
Oh, look at those.
A colossal rock face covered with elaborate engravings.
This mountain is a perfect setting for a reproductive fertility rite ceremony. There's a lot of grass here. It's very lush, and the mountain itself is so grand that it's natural that people would want to come here and have ceremonies.
I see females performing a very ritual dance, and some of them even falling into ecstasy during the dance time. And the copulation between the male and the female are prominent in these scenes.
These 3,000-year-old dancing women with their narrow waists and stylized gestures are nearly identical to figures found in Bulgaria and in the Ukraine, dated to about 1,000 years earlier. There, too, the dancers celebrate fertility and reproduction. These figures have large noses, long faces, and round eyes. The nomads are thought to have Iranian origins. Here, their Western roots are literally carved in stone. Eager to establish if the nomads traded for grain with the mummy people, Charlotte and Lou try to figure out how well the ancient herdsmen ate by studying their skeletal remains.
In a healthy human body, this bit of the pelvis should be separate from the sacrum and able to move freely. But this half is fused.
I suspect this is probably due to injury. And again, this may well be related to their lifestyle, maybe to horse riding. On the back of the mandible, you'll see a very large hole there, which indicates that the bone has got infected inside. The pressure's built up, and it's forced the pus that's formed inside the bone. Exposes the pulp cavity, the centre of the tooth, which you can see there. An infection gets into the roots of the teeth and causes destruction of the bone. Suggested this is associated with walking up and down steep mountainsides, being in the hills a lot.
I don't see much evidence in the nomadic skeletons I've looked at of nutritional deficiencies, so therefore they must have been getting additions to their main part of the diet from a source, and that's probably from the agriculturalists, and they would have been trading their animals for things like grain, fruit and vegetables.
It now seems certain that the nomads bartered with the mummy people for food. But it turns out they became far more enterprising, wide-ranging traders. Their graves contain such items as a 3,000-year-old makeup stick and numerous bronze objects made hundreds of miles away.
We have evidence of long-distance trade across the mountains and steppes. So we have bronze knives, which show a very strong affinity with the steppe nomads on the northern side of the Tian Shan and clear as far north as southern Siberia.
At the time bronze was spreading eastward, the Chinese recorded their first descriptions of European-looking nomads.
They say that they had red hair, bluish-green eyes, and they looked like monkeys, and long noses. They had long noses, and they looked like monkeys. Hairy all over. A bow and some arrows.
Later nomad finds include artifacts that were not intended for sale.
You could still use this.
These swift riders became masters of archery, ready to trade in violence when it suited their interests.
Very powerful.
Before long, the threat of their powerful serpentine bows would profoundly affect the course of Chinese history.
There are several kinds of arrows. This one has an iron.
The bow was found during Lu's most recent excavations, which have yielded many spectacular finds dating to about 300 BC. They are kept in a locked storeroom, and until now have never been filmed by outsiders. One of the most important discoveries is a fully clothed woman wearing a conical hat, symbolic of a high priestess of the nomads. It would one day become the hallmark of witches in Europe. Most startling of all is a male mummy, bearing marks unlike any seen before. The man's chest had been incised, possibly due to lung disease, then sewn up with horsehair sutures. By this time, the distinction between farmers and nomads was blurring.
They lived in tents, they followed the grasses and waters, they had considerable knowledge of agriculture. They owned cattle, horses, camels, sheep, and goats. They were proficient with bows and arrows. They seemed to be both nomadic and agriculturalist at the same time. So I believe that they were able to adapt to different kind of circumstances, and that those who found themselves in oases, for example, became farmers. And those who were in upper pastures or in grasslands either maintained a nomadic lifestyle or they became nomads.
Up in the high mountains, the nomadic population expanded rapidly and soon reached the Chinese frontier. Trading directly with the Chinese, they fell in love with their superb silks. To this day, dearly prized by the region's nomadic Cossacks.
The nomads had extensive trade networks from about 1000 BC, but the trade in silk began around 300 BC and spread right across the steppes to Central Asia, to Persia, and to Europe. This was the luxury item they really coveted.
If the Chinese refused to supply them, the nomads bargained even harder. Waves of horsemen laying waste to border towns. The Chinese cavalry was not powerful enough to chase them. But they did have superb engineers. The Great Wall of China was linked up in the 3rd century BC from sections that had been built earlier. It was not yet the wall we see today, but it was large enough to impress the nomads. Along the emerging Silk Road, the Chinese erected watchtowers to warn travelers if marauding nomads approached. In time, cities sprang up along the road. But who built them? Victor believes that at least one city, Zhaohe, may have originally been founded by the ancestors of the Tocharians, a mysterious people possibly descended from the ancient mummies. In fact, the European-looking bodies recently discovered by Liu live near Zhaohe and date to about 300 BC, when the town was first settled. Victor's research shows that Tocharians were living here as early as the 3rd century BC. Several hundred years later, when ethnic Chinese first arrived, most of the inhabitants were still Tocharian. Who were these enigmatic people? If Victor can corroborate his hunch that they descended from the ancient mummy people, a startling conclusion would be inescapable. This region on the very doorstep of ancient China was continuously populated by people of European origin from as early as 1800 BC through the boom days of the Silk Road.